On this Wednesday night, an apology on behalf of Parliament.
This was deeply embarrassing. I would like to present unreserved apologies.
What the Prime Minister said and why the opposition still claims it's his fault.
Real damage has been done.
The catering company at the center of an E. coli outbreak in Calgary charged with bylaw infractions.
Our goal is to develop a system that is stronger and safer.
Plus, the source is likely the meatloaf, as parents suspected. Wedding nightmare, the investigation and devastation after a fire kills more than 100 in Iraq. And a hint of smoke, how Canadian winemakers are adapting to extreme weather.
The industry has to be more resilient.
Plus, Commander bites again, the training mission taking shape in the White House.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Prime Minister has offered what he calls Parliament's unreserved apologies to the world for recognizing a Ukrainian man who fought with a Nazi unit during the Second World War. Yaroslav Hunka was invited by the Speaker of the House to be in the gallery when Ukraine's president addressed Parliament last week. Politicians of all stripes gave him a standing ovation.
This was a mistake that has deeply embarrassed Parliament and Canada. It was a horrendous violation of the memory of the millions of people who died in the Holocaust, and it was deeply, deeply painful.
The Speaker, Anthony Rota, has since resigned and takes sole responsibility for inviting Hunka. Trudeau said today everyone who applauded the 98-year-old regrets what happened. But the whole episode is still being used by critics of the Liberal government and of Canada to go on the attack. Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
5 days after giving a standing ovation to a Nazi veteran, the Prime Minister repented.
On behalf of all of us in this House, I would like to present unreserved apologies for what took place on Friday and to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation for the position they were put in.
But apologizing for all MPs, not the right tone for the Conservatives.
This Prime Minister allowed for a monumental, unprecedented and global shame to unfold in this chamber. Will he take personal responsibility for this shame and personally apologize on behalf of himself?
The Leader of the Opposition knows that not one parliamentarian was aware, but the truth does not matter to this Leader of the Opposition.
The Speaker is allowed to invite whoever they want to Parliament without any oversight, including from the Prime Minister, even if that guest is a man who fought in a Nazi division.
He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero.
Anthony Rota didn't know Yaroslav Hunka had ties to the Nazis when he made those comments, but they forced him to resign as Speaker and the Prime Minister to apologize. Those actions coming too late for Jewish groups.
What took so long? It clearly was a terrible error. You know, these are people who swore personally allegiances to Adolf Hitler.
A day after Rota's resignation, the race to replace him is already underway.
Let my name stand, and along with some really other great candidates in Parliament.
Quebec MP Greg Fergus, the first Liberal to announce he'd like the prestigious job, joined by current Deputy Speaker and Conservative MP Chris D'Entremont.
I think there has to be some more decorum in the House, more respect for one another.
The vote to officially replace Rota as Speaker is likely to take place next Tuesday, which will give the weekend for candidates to work behind the scenes and lobby fellow MPs to vote them into one of Ottawa's most important jobs. Donna?
There's an update on that E. coli outbreak at daycares in Calgary. More than 3 weeks after it was first declared, the medical health officer says the likely source is, as parents suspected, the meatloaf. It made hundreds of children sick. There were 351 lab-confirmed cases and 37 cases of secondary E. coli infection. We also learned today the catering company that provided the meals was operating without a proper business license. The City of Calgary is now charging that company.
These families have endured the agony of watching their children suffer from the battle against E. coli that should have been prevented. And we know as a government that we must take action to ensure that this never happens again.
There are no new cases, but 4 children are still in the hospital. The province says it's created a review panel to look at what went wrong, though as Heather Yourex-West explains, it could be a long time before there are any answers.
Go, go, go! Back to being the bundle of energy you'd expect from a 4-year-old, Lachlan is still spending his days at home. Nearly a month after a meal provided by his daycare made him incredibly sick.
We no longer have my son in daycare, so there's a lot of burning the candle at both ends.
As one of the hundreds of families affected by what has become the largest outbreak of E. coli traced back to a single food source, McDonald is anxious to ensure this doesn't happen again. Investigators now say the likely source of the outbreak was meatloaf distributed by the Fueling Minds Catering Kitchen, a kitchen that's now been charged by the city of Calgary for operating without a proper business license.
When they moved to the business model of catering for outside daycare centers, that's when the food service license would be required.
If convicted, the kitchen could face a fine of up to $120,000.
I just wonder, how do these things get discovered if not for an E. coli outbreak? Who's looking at kitchens and licenses and keeping companies and organizations accountable for the legislation that we already have in place to keep people safe?
The kitchen had been inspected by public health officials multiple times earlier this year, with a number of violations flagged each time. Alberta Health Services' last inspection in April ultimately gave Fueling Minds the green light to operate, though after that there was no follow-up inspection until September, after kids started getting sick.
Our goal is to develop a system that is stronger and safer, and one that every parent can trust.
But short of a full public inquiry, the province has announced an independent third-party review. Welcome news to parents like McDonald as they look for answers and do what they can to recover and move on. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
In the U.S., American regulators have launched a landmark lawsuit against Amazon. The Federal Trade Commission, along with 17 states, are suing Amazon, alleging its monopoly means consumers get worse deals. As Taria Isri reports, it accuses the trillion-dollar company of using its dominance to squeeze out other retailers and create artificially high prices.
This Ottawa bookstore sells thousands of titles, including How to Resist Amazon and Why.
I think that they should be challenged in their practices, and they're big enough that they have so much influence and so much reach.
The U.S. Federal Trade Commission and 17 states have launched a lawsuit accusing the company of exploiting its monopolies in ways that enrich Amazon but harm its customers. The woman leading the charge is FTC Chair Lena Khan, who rose to fame as a Yale law student with a paper about how antitrust laws have failed to rein in Amazon.
We think that there's enormous urgency here in terms of the harms that the American public is facing.
The lawsuit alleges consumers are paying artificially higher prices because of tactics that make it impossible for rivals to compete, like blocking merchants from selling their products for less and forcing them to use and pay for Amazon's delivery services. Jeff Bezos started the company in his garage in 1994, selling books.
The most important thing is to be customer obsessed.
It's since become the everything store, now worth a whopping $1.3 trillion U.S.
In the States, there's been a trend over the last few years to go after the term big tech. And so I think this is just the next iteration.
Amazon says federal trade regulators have their facts wrong and that the FTC's focus has radically departed from its mission of protecting consumers and competition. The FTC is asking the court to consider forcing Amazon to sell its assets.
The appetite for breaking up companies that make our lives easier and cheaper is low.
Canada's Competition Bureau declined to comment when asked whether a similar investigation is underway here. But Canadian regulators are likely following this lawsuit very closely, as Ottawa, like Washington, takes a closer look at how big tech is monopolizing so much of our lives. Taria Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
A landmark lawsuit is underway in Europe over the future impact of the climate crisis. 6 young people from Portugal are taking 32 countries to the European Court of Human Rights. They accuse the countries of failing to take quick enough action to protect them from climate change. The lawsuit is the first of its kind and adds to the pressure on governments to accelerate plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions. As Eric Sorensen reports, the stakes are high.
On a beach in Portugal, two young people explained why they're taking 32 European governments to court. Heat waves and extreme drought are more frequent in Portugal these days, says Andre. And Sofia added, "We thought it is now or never to speak up."
They are Claudia, Catarina, Martin.
Today, 6 young Portuguese had their day in court, alleging that governments across Europe are violating their human rights, doing too little to protect them from climate change.
Today's case is about the young. It is about the price that they are paying for the failure of states to tackle the climate emergency.
The argument is that young people in particular face a future of hardship.
Rising heat and air pollution means less time spent outdoors, infringing on children's human rights to education, to play and to engage in recreational activities.
European government lawyers say they accept the impacts of climate change, but that these cases should be heard in national courts first. It is a new legal frontier in the battle to address climate change and force governments around the world to do more to protect young generations who don't have the power to protect themselves. A similar case is ongoing in this country. 4 years ago, 15 young people filed a challenge in BC to put the federal government on trial for what's facing the next generation.
They are already being harmed by climate change, and the federal government, therefore, is violating their rights to life, liberty, and security.
That case has found its way to the Federal Court of Appeal. In Montana, a judge ruled last month in favor of young people who'd accused the state of violating their rights by promoting fossil fuels. It's being appealed, but it demonstrates that young people see the courts as a mechanism to force governments to do more.
It's allowing young people to have a voice and start calling out the injustices that are facing their generation.
If the case brought by young people in Europe is upheld, it could lead to national courts ordering governments to act more quickly to curb emissions. A decision there is expected next year. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Climate change is also threatening the wine industry. The risk and the intensity of wildfires is on the rise. Several BC wineries suffered over this summer, which was the worst wildfire season on record. Neetu Garsha visited one of the province's hardest hit wineries to look at how they're being forced to evolve.
Grapes from vineyards in BC's Okanagan Valley are known for making wines with hints of pear, nectarine, and apple. But what about notes of wildfire?
Smoke is a factor in a vintage, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there was a fire. The vintage is ruined.
Winemakers are learning to mitigate the issue of so-called smoke taint using winemaking and harvesting techniques.
We just have to manage that differently, so the industry has to be more resilient and look at innovation.
We want to target those by 10.
Researchers at UBC Okanagan say 2003 was the first major instance of smoke profoundly affecting wine quality. Now there's a better understanding of how smoke interacts with a grape, how to protect ripening crops, and even using smoke to benefit certain varietals.
We can harness that knowledge potentially to also guide an understanding of how the environment might enhance or make more desirable aromas in BC wines.
As the region's wildfires rage on, Tony Stewart says the damage is done, including through travel restrictions which crippled tourism.
It's probably one of the most significant events that we've had to deal with.
When you look, it just burnt all the way around. It actually came right through the fence on this side, so probably about 4 rows have been either completely destroyed or very badly damaged.
Niche Winery is among the region's hardest hit. They've been closed for nearly a month and a half.
All of our crop has been consumed by wildlife, and so we've lost the fence, we've lost the crop, we lost an equipment shed that housed some of our harvest equipment. We've spent our adult lives building this dream, so to see it under threat in that kind of way is really was distressing.
For Stewart, he says there's reason for optimism in the face of the growing threat of more frequent extreme weather events and climate change. And he points to the little-known history of champagne as to why.
The wine industry, its history is built on this. I mean, we're drinking champagne today because of an event in Europe in the late 1600s, which was referred to as the mini ice age.
He wonders what could be brewing right now that could be the next great innovation for wine lovers and an increasingly weather-challenged industry. Neetu Garcha, Global News, West Kelowna, BC. A celebration up in flames in seconds. Coming up, how a fire at an Iraqi wedding left more than 100 dead. The former state minister of Nagorno-Karabakh has been arrested by Azerbaijan. He was detained as he tried to cross into Armenia. Azerbaijan launched an offensive last week in hopes of reintegrating the region. Thousands of refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh have been fleeing the territory since the offensive began, triggering a humanitarian crisis. Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but is populated by mostly ethnic Armenians. The president of Iraq has ordered an investigation into a terrible fire at a wedding celebration. More than 100 people were killed, at least 150 others injured, when the banquet hall they were in went up in flames. It happened in Nineveh in northern Iraq near Mosul. As Mike Armstrong explains, it took just seconds for the celebration to turn into a tragedy. And a warning, some of the details in his story are disturbing.
This is what's left, debris and rubble. According to witnesses, as many as 1,000 people were packed into this hall, a building with only 3 exits. The survivor from a stretcher says the bride and groom had just started their first dance when the chaos began. They were slow dancing when the fire started, she says. Video on social media appears to show pyrotechnics being shot off in the hall and decorations catching fire. This man says suddenly the entire ceiling was in flames and burning material was falling on people. Now, according to authorities, the hall was built with prefabricated panels that were highly flammable and against the safety code. They were also plastic and released toxic gases as they burned. This military official says 9 people from the hall's administration have been arrested. They're still looking for others. Meantime, many families have been left looking for loved ones. Nearby hospitals were overwhelmed and victims ended up in facilities all over the region. As for the dead, about 30 bodies have been identified, but most are so badly burned it'll take DNA testing for identification. When this family went to the site, they found only the clothes their mother was wearing. She's still missing, as are in some cases entire families. There are reports the bride and groom were able to escape. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Luck of the draw ahead. How many Canadians are hoping to get really rich tonight?
$60 million, eh?
68.
Well, I'd first of all, I'd take 10% of that and I'd donate it to my church.
If I won the lottery tonight, I'd probably build a indoor wave pool in Regina so we could surf in Regina.
We can all dream, right? Well, someone is going to win big tonight. The Lotto 649 jackpot is a record $68 million, breaking the previous record of $64 million. And this is the first time that all 29 white balls have been drawn before the gold ball, meaning tonight's draw is guaranteed to feature a maximum gold ball jackpot of a cool $68 million. Canada's women's soccer team officially punched its ticket to next year's Olympics in Paris, where they'll have the opportunity to defend their Olympic title.
France, Canada have done it.
The women beat Jamaica 2-1 in their qualifier in Toronto on Tuesday. That win serves as a high point for the squad after they failed to advance from the group stage at the FIFA Women's World Cup earlier this year. A note about some changes at Global News. A program I hosted called The New Reality is ending. The television news magazine series premiered on Global in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, a challenging time in all our lives that required information, insight, and in-depth discussion. The program carried on beyond that, exploring broader topics about scientific, medical, and cultural advancements in Canada and the world. In what Chorus calls a business decision, the program will not be renewed for 2024. The final 8 episodes will air this fall. He hasn't been a good boy. Next, why the Biden family dog might need a shorter leash. Being president of the United States comes with all kinds of challenges, and for President Joe Biden right now, that includes dealing with his dog. Commander, the family's German Shepherd, has made the news again for biting another Secret Service agent at the White House. Brittany Rosen looks at why the presidential pup is in the doghouse.
Hey, pal.
The phrase "a dog is a man's best friend" certainly rings true for President Biden and Commander. However, the 2-year-old German Shepherd has had a rough time warming up to Biden's closest colleagues.
They have been partnering with the Secret Service and executive resident staff on additional leashing protocols and training.
Commander has nipped 11 Secret Service agents since last October, even sending one to hospital. The latest incident unfolding Monday at the White House.
As a fellow dog owner, you know, we want people to like dogs and want to have dogs around, and I think part of that is like not having your dog biting people.
Commander isn't the first privileged pet to attack. The UK Prime Minister's feline, Larry the cat, also made headlines after clawing at a journalist.
Good, Gunner, sit. Good boy.
Scott Dancer has trained thousands of dogs, including this 9-year-old German Shepherd, Gunner.
Is it a matter of the dog is being overprotective of Biden? Does it sense some sort of threat in the air? Why does this keep happening?
So it sounds like there's a lot of hustle and bustle going on at the White House.
Dancer says Commander is likely under a great deal of stress, constantly seeing a host of unfamiliar faces. The solution, he says, is more socialization.
We need to set them up for success by meeting new people, by kind of building a language between you and the dog in order to communicate what you expect from them.
Dancer says with the proper training, a dog like Gunner or even Commander could learn to stop biting within weeks.
Good boy.
He adds it would be a positive step in the right direction. Brittany Rosen, Global News, Washington.
Good.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Shoal Harbour in Clarenville, Newfoundland and Labrador. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.